recording on my computer. I think that recording my computer might be more, make me have worse connection. I've got everything set up. I've got an Ethernet cord. I've got Wi-Fi. I've got it all going. So it is so super great to see. They say there's 70 faces to the Torah, but we're going to have maybe almost 70 faces on our Zoom. So that is just beyond exciting and thrilling for me as a rabbi at Seaside Jewish Community. And if you haven't met me, I'm Rabbi Julie Danan. And I'm wondering if anybody is actually, you can write in the chat like where you're coming from. Some people were talking about where they're coming from, because we have people from coast to coast, actually, even though if they are Seaside members, from California to deep South Florida. Or if you're not a member, I think some people from the Jewish Federation just saw it may have seen it on the Jewish Federation mailing. So if you're coming from somewhere else and you want to let us know, you can put it in the chat. Okay. Some people are new people. We're happy to get to know you. So when I'm starting a class, I like to start, to set the tone when it's a class for the synagogue, to set a tone by doing just a bit of a nigun, a melody, and then to have a blessing for the study of Torah, which I'll show on the screen. Lasok b'divrei Torah, to be occupied, or you could think we're taking a nice soak, and be occupied with words of Torah. And you're welcome to join in that or to say amen to that. So this is a melody actually taught at services, and some people liked it. I'm not going to put the words, just the melody like this. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. It just has one more part. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Repeat that once. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Okay, so that sounded great. Here's introducing you. Here is our class, Jews in Search of God. I took a lot of the pictures on the slides. If I did take the picture, or I know who took it, I put it on the slide. Otherwise, it's a stock photo. And here is the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Holy One of blessing, your presence fills creation, who made us holy with mitzvot and bid us to engage with words of Torah. Now I'm putting myself with speaker view so that people with the recording, it should show it on speaker view. So I'd be interested if you want to put in the chat, a couple of people put in where they're coming from. Oh, and by the way, I'm putting in the chat right now what we have on tap each week, what the subjects are each week. And if you want to do reading before, not required, no exam, but if you want to do reading, you'll find that you can find it here, the reading that you're supposed to do, or that you could do if you want. There's also going to be a page on our website, which has a handout, like it has like a little syllabus kind of for the class, and also extra books you might want to read if you want, the reading you might want to do. It's all up to you, because this is really a free and open session. So in this class, I hope you're going to gain new information about our history, what our ancestors believed and how they dealt with life, and hopefully a new appreciation for them. Because, well, what could be a bigger subject than God, right? When we're talking about God, we're really talking about life and all the questions of life. And potentially this could be some exploration of our own beliefs. That's my kind of hidden agenda. I'll just put it right out there. we might begin to explore, what do we believe? Are our own beliefs getting stale? Do we need to explore? And it's not going to happen overnight, but you might want to take an inventory of your beliefs and see if they change. I'm even hoping that we'll start this year and maybe go next year into modern Jewish thought. This year, we're just looking at classical Jewish theology, Bible through Kabbalah, just a few millennia. That's all. It'll be very simple. So what to expect in our class? Let's see. What you can expect from me is that, well, all those things that I just said that I'm going to have, and also that we'll have this, we will have a link, we'll send it out, a link will come that you'll be able to access where you can have handouts, source sheets that I made, and recordings. I'll record the class as I'm doing, and then you can watch things that you might miss or that you want to see again. Also, I'll try to be here early and have this open early for people that want to just ask me more questions you didn't get to ask in the seminar, or want to talk to each other. And after, I'm comfortable staying after. If there's people who like want to stay after because you didn't get to ask a question, I could stay a little bit after the class. Okay, what you should bring. First of all, we sent out the link. Some people got the link like 3 times. Some people didn't get the link. Now that you've gotten it, you should be getting it every week, but it's going to be the same link. So don't stress about it. If you want to put it somewhere, you know, on your computer, or you'll be able to find it every week. I do appreciate you having your camera on because I love to see your faces and like interact as much as I can, although I know sometimes you need to turn it off, so I get it, but it's lovely if you can have it on as possible. And as you see, you're muted, and the Herschelers are going to be my co-hosts and make sure there's not background noise, but if you be considerate to be muted when you're not speaking. If you want to be called on, you can go to the reactions and at the bottom of your screen, and there's like a raise hand button that will raise your hand so I can see who's trying to be heard. You can do that. We're going to do breakout rooms during the class because I did promise an interactive class, but you know, I had no idea how many people would sign up for the class. So in order to make it more interactive, since there's not time for everybody to speak at every class, we'll have breakouts where you can talk to other students. I'll give you a question and you'll have like 10 minutes that you can talk to each other. And the way to make that work really is to do it, like to go to the breakout room and to go, well, this is the time I'm just going to leave. It's going to be like a 90-minute class. So obviously everyone has different needs. But if you can, go to the breakout rooms and participate. There'll be enough in the room so that if somebody doesn't show up, the other people will still have a nice discussion. If you want to explore more, and if you get really inspired and want to explore more, there's some things you can do. Like I said, I'm going to be sharing some handouts. There'll be a reading list of other books you might want to read that I started reading and got so excited about. Also, I made a thing called like your personal theology inventory. If you want to think about what your beliefs are, and you might want to even get a buddy from the class and share it outside of class and talk about some of those things, or with me before or after the class. Okay, and the other thing, I guess, was to just bring your open minds and willingness to learn. I think you already did that. So let's see. It's kind of a commonplace that many modern Jews seem to have a problem talking about God. If you think it's true, then you can just like wave. If you think that you've noticed Jews, God, not our favorite subject. A few. Some do want to talk about it. Some are saying yes. Some of you clearly it's a good subject. And I think the fact that you're all here shows that you're willing to talk about it. But why do you think so? I'd be interested in your thoughts. You can, again, put in the chat why you think Jews have a problem talking about God. Some Jews do. Feel free to put that in the chat. Any ideas? Or anybody want to not like, fear of judgment, that you'll be judged for your beliefs, maybe? That we've been persecuted, that is too personal, okay? Oh, define God. Okay, every Jew answers a question with a question there. Yeah. because many of us don't believe. People are secular and don't believe in God. We're the minority. No one will understand anyway. Maleness, I don't know. Okay, I'm not sure. Oh, maybe it's because I've always seen God as male, and I can't, I don't know exactly what you mean by that if you want to explain more, but talking about the gender of God could be a topic, a sore topic. So we had some different reasons that were given. Any more coming up there? So I think, some other things have been brought out. Some of the things you already said is I think that we're a religion. Oh, that God is always portrayed as male. Well, we'll get to that. We'll find out. Was God really always portrayed as male in Judaism? We'll see that there were plenty of Jewish ideas of female God, even if the dominant one is always in the masculine pronoun. So yeah, many Jews just don't believe so. And, and that's the thing, to be a good Jew, and I tell people this, we're about deed, not creed, right? So we don't determine your Jewishness by what you believe, but by who you are and what you do. So you don't have to be religious to be Jewish. And some people see that being preoccupied with God is a kind of a Christian idea. Can I say, it sounds weird, but when I go into church, we have our services, high holiday services at a church. If I look around at the materials that are there, there's a lot about God. And I wonder if Jews are talking about God so much. It's ironic, isn't it? Also, let's be honest, after persecution, as somebody mentioned in the chat, after the Holocaust, some Jews are angry at God. Some Jews are not sure we believe in a God that will let all those things happen. And also, as a couple of people mentioned, a lot of Jews are secular rationalists and don't want to talk about God. And at the same time, we all have an inner life, we have spirituality, and we want to, for ourselves, experience and explore our beliefs in our inner lives. Okay, now one other thing I'm going to ask you. Well, actually, I'm going to open this up because I see not many people are putting in the chat. A lot of Jews come to synagogue maybe a couple of times a year for the high holidays. So if you came on the high holidays, what would your images of God be? What would you think? If you only show up on the high holidays, what do you hear about God? Yeah. And feel free to raise your hand, and maybe I'll let the Herschelers call on people as my helpers there, my co-hosts. If people are raising their hands, who could say something, if you come on the high holidays, what's the idea you come away with about God? You can write in the chat, or you can, but you can speak up and unmute. All-knowing and forgiving, but yeah, that's good. The forgiving part. Hamelech, that's the king. Mm-hmm. You wanna, okay, maybe we should decide what is a Jew. Actually, we're not going to get into what's a Jew. We're going to who's God. That will be a different class. Okay, raise your hand. Shelley, raise your hand. Shelley, you want to speak up?
Yeah, if you only come to synagogue on the high holidays, what you hear about is that it's like the highest vision of God. It's the traits of forgiveness and of anger and of love, but it's always like elevated to a throne.
So very good. Thank you. I like the way you describe that. A very transcendent God, you could say, right? A God who's way up there on the throne. And forgiving, but judgmental. We have, okay, that definitely we have the at that time of year, you could say we have a metaphor of God as a judge. Some judging, and what do we call God? What's the song we're always singing, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, a patriarchal God, and a patriarchal God and a sovereign, a king. So, and then there's some stories that we read about God that are kind of disturbing on the high holidays. We read a biblical story about God, but it's a story about God commanding our ancestor to sacrifice his son. So that's like, of course, at the last minute, he tells him to stop, but it's a disturbing story, right? Accountability. Okay, God calls us to accountability. I think that's a healthy thing, right? Anyway, what I hope to do in this class is to remedy some of that and to show the myriad, the kaleidoscope of images and metaphors. In other words, the language, the poetic language we use to try to describe our encounters with the divine. You know, when you're in our, we've got some more answers coming in, so I'll let you guys read those in the chat. They're good ones. So when we say our prayers,
I think George, did you want to say something?
George, you want to say something?
It was accountability, Rabbi Julie.
Thank you, thank you. So when we pray on Shabbat, we pray our God and Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu. That's like God and God of our ancestors. And then it says the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of Sarah, the God of Rebecca, etc. You notice how each time it says the God of. So a Hasidic Rebbe said there's a reason for that it repeats that, to say that each generation has their own version of God. Each generation really has their own ideas of God. And we're adding to that chain. It's not enough to just stay in the past. We'll see how the ideas of God change from the Bible to the rabbinic thought and into the Middle Ages and Kabbalah, right? And then eventually, maybe later on, get to modern theology. And my not so secret agenda, again, is to show that there have been so many different views of the divine throughout Jewish history to make us think bigger and to think more creatively in our own ideas and not be limited to a few images of the many. Because in fact, and we're going to, okay, closed captioning, yes. Yes, that's good. Have you, oh, I don't have to do anything about that, right? That's just on thing, that's fine. Okay. So tonight we'll start with God in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, aka the Old Testament to Christians, but we call it the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible. And this is, of course, we're not giving a whole class on the Hebrew Bible, just about God in the Hebrew Bible, the main character of the Hebrew Bible. This is a time period we could say that stretches back to like from 4,000 years ago to about 2,000 years ago. We say, you know, it's between 1,600 and 2,000 years, and all before the year one, like when the Christian era begins. And the two ideas I want to make sure you come away with today are that of encounter and metaphor. So I'm going to put those words in the chat, encounter and metaphor. Okay. Because what do I mean by encounter? We may assume that we as modern people are more sophisticated in our view of theology than our ancestors, but let's not be so sure about that. I would like to give you the points of view of some scholars, some noted scholars. James Kugel, a noted Bible scholar who did a whole commentary on the Hebrew Bible, said that we modern people are wrapped up in our self-importance, in the noise of our lives, the constant interruptions, the busyness of our lives. But our ancestors in ancient times seemed much humbler. They were open to spirituality, the spirituality of life, and they sensed their own smallness in relation to the world, while we think we're large. The only time, sometimes when we are confronted with a crisis in our lives or an illness or a loss, then we revert, he says, and he went through a period like that. We're able to get that feeling that our ancestors had of the awe of what's bigger than us. And that's the point of view that we should start with in looking at biblical theology. Then there's a famous writer, Karen Armstrong. She's a scholar of theology in the Bible. They're not Jewish, but very interesting. She said that, I don't think she's Jewish. I'm not totally sure. Modern people tend to think in simplistic terms about God compared to the ancients. We see religion as a series of doctrines or dogmas, while ancient people of all religions tended to view religion, they didn't even have a word for religion. It was an encounter with mystery and awe in life. This has been echoed by some great modern day rabbis in the 20th century. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He was one of the greatest American Jewish rabbis ever. He said that religion begins with awe and wonder, not with dogma and theology. Or as my own teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi said, theology is the afterthought of the believer. In other words, first we have the intense experiences of encounter we have a spiritual moment, and we've all had them. We've all had those peak experiences, but sometimes they just pass by after. And then we need to make up an explanation. We tell a story. The stories get told enough, it becomes theology, it becomes religion. So let's see, I'm toggling back a little bit between speaker and gallery, just trying to get used to teaching a big group on Zoom. Yeah, and feel free again, if some of this resonates with you, put something in the chat if you want, like, I think that's true. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, or wait, could you explain that, etc. So how do we talk about God then? How can we talk about those experiences that we have that are kind of ineffable, right? Ineffable means there's no words for them. If we have a very spiritual experience, we could come away with, oh, it was so deep, but I don't even know how to describe it. We could say it was like something. It was kind of like when you're at a rock concert. I know, it's kind of like when you just had a baby and you held them in your arms for the first time. It's kind of like that, a day at the beach, the sun rising. We think of metaphorical language, and that's something that we use a lot to describe God.
Oh,
Yes.
Michelle has a comment.
Okay, Michelle, what would you like to share, Michelle?
Yes, hi. All throughout the Torah, we have God speaking
Yes.
to a variety of folks, especially Moshe, and appearing to him, showing his backside to Moshe.
Right.
And, I've always wondered, what exactly was that process of God speaking to a variety of individuals? And, if I picture it like in today's terms, I've always wondered, well, why isn't God speaking to, in the same way, perhaps, other leaders and even common folks? And I know there can be communication through dreams,
right.
Meditation, just listening to our intuition.
Right.
But I guess with the exception of Joseph and Jacob, dreams maybe aren't the primary source. There's more of a speaking conversation. And I was wondering if you could comment on that from a renewal perspective.
Well, that is, first of all, that's a very deep and that's a very fabulous question. I could say, because there was more than one question there. There was the encounter. What is it like to see God's back or God's face, to encounter God face to face? And then the other one was, why doesn't God speak to us anymore? God seems to be talking all the time, and then it seems less and less frequent. Yeah, is that fair? Are those two questions?
Almost, but not speaking to us, apparently, in the same way that it occurred in biblical times.
Okay, so we could feel a communication, but not the way it's in God said. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, those are both very huge questions, but I'll give you a couple. I may even share some things later, because sometimes I'm taking notes of questions that I had not, allowed time for today. So then I can bring, luckily it's 5-week class, and I can come back with some of that. But I'll say one of the things about seeing God's back, it's very,
well, that's a metaphor, obviously.
Yeah, there's an interesting idea that seeing God's back, but I have to look up the person who said this. It was a rabbi, a modern renewal rabbi. And that seeing God's back could be seeing through God's eyes, to step into godliness and behold through God's eye view. It's not seeing, do you see, not seeing face to face, but being aligned with God so that Moses could see the big picture and look at the world with the same compassion and vision of God. That's a very beautiful interpretation. Yeah. As for why God seems so much more present, you see that in the Bible, you'll see the Bible, right, takes place over some 1600 or more years. And in the beginning, God is walking around, talking to people face to face, Adam and Eve, and then more like giving laws through Moses, and then through dreams, and then through or oracles or through prophets. It gets more and more distant. And there was a whole book written about that, which I put in the reading list bibliography that we'll be sharing. And one of the interesting things is that those books were not even necessarily written in the chronological order that they take place in the Bible. So it's a fascinating question. It's a little too big for me to answer right now, nor do I have the exact answer to it.
Okay.
But it's one of our questions to look at. Yeah.
Can you just give me the title of that book?
The original name was The Disappearance of God, A Divine Mystery. Then it was, I guess that title was too far out and it was published in a different, with a different name, but I put it on the reading list that you'll be getting. Okay. So I hope I give you a little answer for now and we can explore this more. I wrote down so we can explore it more later. Okay. So when we think about God as the king, that's one of the operative the operative metaphors that we hear about on the high holidays, right? God the king. So we might think that's one of the most ancient ideas of God. But in fact, that was one of the later biblical ideas of God, that as Jews became subject to empires, and in later parts of the Bible, God becomes a more distant power experienced by people in a less immediate and a less intimate way compared to our earlier text, where God is like walking around and talking with us. When the kingdom of Judah is conquered by the Babylonian Empire and the Jewish leadership is exiled to Babylonia, God became understood as a kind of distant emperor, excuse me. But earlier on, God was and this is a lot from James Kugel, right? Earlier on, God was sort of a surprise. You go to a bush, you see a little brush fire, and suddenly there's an angel of God talking to you. And an angel could just be like a projection of God, kind of like God called you on the phone. Don't think of it necessarily as something with wings, right? And people were sort of, Professor Kugel says that people were ready to be surprised by God kind of on every street corner, yeah? So what I'd like to do now is actually, though, begin to look at some text. We'll come back to some of the theory. I'd like to start with looking at some text. And so I'm going to share with you on the screen two very different views of God from the very beginning of the Bible. Okay. Oop. All right, so this is Genesis 1, and I'd like to have somebody read this if that's okay. Let me see. How about George, would you read this for us?
Sure
Chapter
will.
1 of Genesis, okay.
Magisterial God. When God, Elohim, began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind of God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. There was evening, and there was morning, one day.
Okay, so I think many or most of us have heard the whole account of the 6 days of creation in Genesis 1. And you see how God seems to be kind of hovering over everything, and then just speaking, just with words, creates the world. And if we would look even into the Hebrew, the name that's used for God, it's Elohim. It's a certain name for God. That doesn't necessarily come through in the translation. Now, Genesis 2 and 3, it's kind of retells the story of creation in a very different way, and God seems very different in this version. And I wonder if we could get a reader for this one. And since I can't see everybody, I don't know if the Herschelers can call on somebody for me, if anyone's raising their hand to read. Would you guys read it then? Herschelers, you want to read it for us?
No, sure. But when you're sharing, we can't see everybody.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll just have to do our, but we'll just call on people then. So wherever it says Yud Hey Vav Hey, I put that in there on purpose so you'd really know that has the 4-letter name of God. We'll learn about that in a moment. But you could say like Adonai Elohim, okay? Would you read that, Hirschler's, for us? Okay.
Adonai Elohim formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being.
God planted a garden in Eden in the east and placed there the man whom he had formed.
Later, God takes a rib or side of the man and fashions a wife for him and brings her to him. Later, Midrash will suggest the first Adam began as androgynous.
Later, after eating the forbidden fruit, they heard the voice of God walking in the garden in the breezy time of day. The man and his wife hid from God amid the trees of the garden. God called out to the man and said, "Where are you?"
Okay. So I'm trying to stop my share, but okay. Stop the share for a minute so I can see you again. All right, so that's the very beginning of the Torah, the very beginning of the Hebrew Bible. You saw two very different views of God, right? In the creation story, two creation stories, basically. And the first one, God says, let there be light, let there be grasses, let there be seas. It just happens. And the name used is Elohim. In the second two chapters, it's Yud-He, Vav-He Elohim, or we say Adonai Elohim, but this mystery name of God and Elohim's got different names. And it's a whole different portrayal of God. What is that second God like? You could write in the chat. How did that God compare to the first one? You write your ideas in the chat if you want. That you can. I mean, that, yeah. The second God seems, okay, more specific. Creator sentiment, humanistic. It is a very humanistic story. The first one, in the first story, human beings are created last. And in the second story, human beings are created first, if we really got into the story. It is very human oriented. Good call. Let's see. Oh, the second one, okay. Humanistic. If God is all seeing and all knowing, how could Adam and Eve hide from him? Exactly. Don't tell me God is an all powerful, omnipotent king. The very first people disobeyed God. I mean, they got in trouble, but like your kids, are you an omnipotent parent? Your kids disobey you. God seems no more omnipotent than a parent. We got Elsa, they're like a parent. Yeah. So the whole idea of God the king is a later development. Here's God kind of walking around in the garden, planting. God's a gardener. If you're a gardener, you could identify with God there, right? He had a vision, was disappointed when it did seem or didn't seem to work out. I don't know. But Neil Gilman, this great theologian that I'm gonna recommend a lot of his books. He said that when we look at the things that tie together the biblical idea of God, since remember, there are so many different ideas of God, he said there's four main characteristics that always are kind of found in all the ideas of God in the Bible. God is one, unique and alone. God is he says all powerful. God is powerful. I don't know about all powerful. God's involved in history. God cares and is personal. But paradoxically, God gets disappointed and suffers, and we let God down all the time. The Jewish people let God down a lot in the Torah. God is Avinu. Okay, Avinu, you could say. And the where are you? Yeah, there's a lot of questions of why did God ask, where are you? Did God really not know where they were? Or was God just trying to put them on the spot and say, I know what you're up to. Come on out here. I know you're hiding. Okay. All right. Doesn't God see everything? That's the whole idea. The later ideas, these Greek ideas, the ideas we'll see in Maimonides of God, the omnipresent, omnipotent, right? God is all powerful. God is all knowing. Those are kind of later ideas, not necessarily so in these earlier parts of the Bible. Because if God was all powerful, why, unless, well, of course, many questions are coming up. Is God he or she? Well, it doesn't say God is he or she, but it does use a masculine pronoun. So you decide. I mean, we're always told that didn't matter, but it kind of does matter, because if you're always hearing a masculine pronoun, because Hebrew is a very gendered language, you do come away with the idea that God is a he. But don't worry, we'll see plenty of God as she as we go along. Okay, so I want to say a little bit more about these two stories. First of all, as I mentioned, and I can't stress enough, the Bible is not, the Hebrew Bible is not just one book. It is one book when we look at it today. It's one bound book, right? But it's also a library. We could think of it as a library of 39 books or 39 scrolls. If you went to the caves of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were scrolls lying all over the place. It wasn't all in one book. And you know, even that big red book we have at Seaside, the Chumash, that's just the first 5 books, plus the Haftarahs, okay, some prophetic readings. And as I said, it is spanning a long period of time from the early Bronze Age to the Second Temple. So it's, or Middle Bronze Age, have to check that, to the Second Temple. But at any rate, you know, there was a big development in people's ideas of God. And not only that, it doesn't even tell the whole story. Even if you look at what's in the Bible, it leaves out a lot of things that our ancestors were doing. If the Bible says, thou shalt not worship idols, guess what that means? People were worshiping idols, right? Anything that says, thou shalt not do, someone was doing it. And our religion did not develop in a vacuum, but the names that we got for God, for example, that name of El, Elohim, probably came from earlier religions, from Canaanite religion. That was a name that the Canaanites used for their head god. Their chief god was El. We appropriated that name and we made it into a singular God. And sometimes you see, we use it as a plural word, Elohim. That's a plural. We add the singular verb, so we use it as a singular, but there's a hint there that earlier people had an idea that there were multiple gods. Our ancestors, we know even from our text, they had household deities, household gods. The women were worshiping goddesses. And this was happening right beside the worship of Yah and the worship of Elohim. Only as the Bible went on, the prophets spoke, did we really become hardcore monotheists. In fact, we've got a hint of this in our own prayers when we say, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, God, among the gods. That gives us a hint that our ancestors knew there were other gods, but they said ours is the best. That's called monolatry rather than monotheism. They acknowledge there could be other gods, but ours is the top, is the only one that we should worship. And only when we got to the Babylonian exile, 586, before the Common Era, did we begin to get the idea that our God is the only God. Forget those other ones, okay? And I guess in the book of Deuteronomy too, you'll see that too. All right, let's also, let me tell you a little bit more about these two stories, then I want to ask you which one you like better. So in this first story of God, you saw that in the first story of creation, you saw that God is very magisterial and the name Elohim is used. And this comes from what's called the priestly documents of the Bible, possibly the 6th century before the Common Era or earlier. And it uses the name Elohim. The second story comes from a different document called the J documents, which the J is like a Yud. And they use the name Yud He Vav He, or Yah. And sometimes they use it together with Elohim. It probably came from the southern kingdom of Judea. It might have been written around the 10th century. It's very anthropomorphic, very humanistic stories, as we noted, and may have been written by a woman. There's a theory it was written by a woman because there's a lot of concern for the female characters. With that name of El, Elohim, you can see that in Islam, they also use that name because they say Allah. And that came from that name of El, that early Canaanite name that went into our language as El. So I want to ask you to speak up. Which story do you kind of like better in the stories of creation? That in the beginning, God created, you know, man and woman are just created together. It's very egalitarian. They're created last. And then the second story, God plants the Garden of Eden and forms man from the earth and separates out woman, maybe androgynous, separate into two, and then they get in trouble and they get kicked out. Which story do you like better? I could take a vote. Who likes the first story better? Raise your hand if you like the first story better. Yeah, I see a lot of hands going up for the first story. Let me look on page 2 here. Okay, who likes the second story better? All right, if you liked the, why don't you, it's more chronological, the first story? Okay. Would you, anyone want to tell why they like one story or the other? George.
I view the 6 days, 7 days of creation as the beginning of creation. Creation is still going on. It's an act. I like to think of the noun as an active verb. So everything flows from that first cause, God doing the work of putting these things in place, which aren't fixed. They
Yes.
change, and we change with them. And our view of God changes as this environment changes. So the first explanation suits me in giving, I guess, some rational structure to this subject, to this topic. Maybe it's a metaphor for it. I don't know. But creation is ongoing.
Thank you.
Got
And I think
Carol and
that
Stan Newman.
And we'll hear from Carol and Stan next. I just want to say that what you say is echoed in the text, because the text of that first creation story ends with the word la'asot, to do, asher bara Elohim la'asot. And it means like it is ongoing and we're going to continue creation. Okay, Carol
Thank
and
you.
Stan, yes. Unmute, Carol and Stan.
Yeah, I like the first story. I did like what George said, by the way. I like the first story because it's God as a kind of force, as an essence, as the prime mover, if you want, or the essence and the force that is it's sort of the divine inspiration for the creation of the world. When the second story is much too anthropomorphic for my
Yeah.
taste, and but I think the first story really, and I guess I like it the most because it suits my own theology. That's probably
Okay.
the reason. But I do like the first story much better.
Thank you. Good explanation. Okay. Shelley and then Nick. Okay. And be sure and mute.
Yeah, I got it. I think. The reason I like the first story better because it doesn't make everything centered around man.
Mhm.
Whereas the second story, it's all about man and woman, but it's all about humans as opposed to everything, including humans.
Mhm.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I mean, it's true that in the first story, mankind is the last thing. Are we the peak of creation? But there's a midrash that says, if you get too vain, remember the mosquitoes were created first, right? And you could say the second story does, by putting people in the garden to serve creation and be the gardeners and take care of it, that it does involve the rest of creation too, but it's just in a different way. I appreciate that. And we got so many comments. Okay, let's have a couple more and then we'll look at another text and we'll go into breakout rooms so everyone gets a chance to talk. So it's Nick next.
So I also like the first story the most, and on a very, I guess, prosaic level, and that is that if one is going to believe in God, in the ineffable, then God needs to be great or greater than man. And since we know that, or if we believe that man did not create the world, only God could create the world.
Okay. So which story do you prefer?
The first.
The first one. Okay.
Yeah.
Because putting man in a more humble place.
Mhm.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think
Leslie,
so. I'm
if
kind
you
of
have
hearing a
Leslie
pattern
comment.
here that the first story seems to be a little less focused on human beings. We're hearing that again and again. Oh, we've got more.
Leslie is next.
Okay. Leslie, you can speak. Okay. Thank you.
Unmute.
Yeah,
You know,
in the second story, God is actually very
I
petty.
can't do everything for everyone.
He messes with people, he challenges them, he punishes them. He's very human.
Very human. Okay. Yeah.
Which is not
So-
the most attractive set of qualities.
So that could even tie what Nick just said about, this, again, I'm just hearing it again and again, this more anthropomorphic view of God. People don't seem very happy with that. The idea of God being like a person. I'm getting a lot. I'd like to hear some for team chapter 2 and 3, but I haven't heard any yet, but thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's see. We've got Diane and then the Hoffmans. Yeah. Okay. Diane.
Okay, so my question and thought about this comes from a more scientific
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah.
that in the beginning God created and the world was created somehow, we know scientifically as well. So where do God and the science world,
Okay. Yeah.
how do they intertwine? I don't even know what to even say to this
Right.
question. But where do they connect up, I guess, is what
Okay.
I'm for.
Right. Of course, that's another big, huge question. Now, in the bibliography or reading list I'm giving you, there is an interesting book by a very orthodox Jewish scientist who tries to show how everything in the story of Genesis corresponds to actual scientific facts, and he goes to great lengths to show that. And there's an organization called Sinai and Synapses, which is all about science and Judaism, started by Rabbi Gerald Schroeder, I think. Don't quote me on that, but there's Sinai and Synapses is the organization. And so if you want to take a look at that, I think, but I say that most Jews and most rabbis, and certainly non-Orthodox rabbis, would say that's really not what it's about. The story of creation is not trying to be a scientific account. Maybe for our ancestors, yes, they were giving their myth of how they saw creation, but let's look really at the values, the ideas that are there, and really, we're not expecting that to be a scientific account, right? And so what is it saying about God? It's saying about a God who says everything's good, that there's something good about creation, there's something orderly about creation, there's something blessed about creation in that first chapter of Genesis. But if you want to take it as this, as a scientific account, most of us would say not, but some people try to make it that way. Yeah. Okay, and then we got 2 more. Let's do 2 more brief comments, and then I want to do 1 more text, and then you can have breakout rooms so everyone can have a chance to speak to each other. Okay, so the Hoffmans and then the Rosens, I think. Okay.
Okay, it's Al here.
Al, yeah.
I want to argue that we should not dismiss the chapter 2 version, the J author, the otherwise known as Jehovah, by biblical scholars,
Okay.
because in favor of the E version, the Elohim version in chapter 1, because the full J version didn't come down to us and the full E version didn't come down to us. There was a redactor or editor, some say it was Ezra, who chose between the two. And in some cases, like creation, like the story of the flood and others, we have 2 versions. We have both the E and the J version, and sometimes they're in conflict with each other, as the creation version appears to be. But in other cases, the redactor or editor chose either the E or the J version. Here, clearly, the editor picked the E version for the first 6 days of creation, and then picked the J for additional supplemental on the 6th day of creation, of the creation of man and woman. We don't know that the J version didn't have the first 5.5 days of creation in front of it. So we shouldn't dismiss the J version as putting man first when it probably didn't.
Okay, I think that's fair. And as my teacher, Professor Harold Leibowitz, who I'm still getting to study with, he was my mentor at University of Texas. He says, we could also look at the Bible as it comes down to us. It is now a finished book, and that's what we can interpret. But for a lot of, biblical scholars like to pick it apart and look at all these different texts. And as that's a very good point, that maybe, you know, the story we hear from Jay is not the whole story. Jay, and again, for those who are going, Jay, wait, what's that? That's this version of a documentary hypothesis. That's the Bible was put together from different earlier traditions, and that Jay favored the name for God, that's Yud Hey Vav Hey, the 4-letter name. We'll look at that. I want to get to that, so we'll move on to make sure that we do get to that. But I want to tell you something, Al, that I'm on team Jay. I'm on this, I'm on your team. I'll tell you what, I used to be like everybody else who likes chapter 1. I like chapter 1. Why? First of all, man and woman get created together. What's this idea that woman comes from man? When I was in the maternity ward, it didn't work that way, you know, but it was the other way around. It seemed to be like a male fantasy that the woman's taken out of the man. And, you know, it's all the stuff people brought up, all the objections, but and chapter 1 so elegant, it's priestly, it's beautiful, but chapter 2, it's such a good story. There's drama, there's that humanity, there's that everyday struggle of life. And in fact, I could say religion is like that. Okay. There's the beautiful, serene, awe-inspiring moments, and there's the nitty-gritty of life and all of the, you know, disappointment, suffering, anger, and all that. That's kind of like the second version. Okay, last comment. Jeff, you get the last word on this. Make it brief because we want to go into another text, and then I'll have people go in breakout rooms. They want to run out of class. Okay, Jeffrey, you're speaking, but you're muted. So unmute yourself, Jeffrey. Okay, Jeffrey, you're still mute.
Jeffrey is unmuted.
I don't
but we
know. He
can't
says he's
hear him.
unmuted, and yet we can't hear him.
Turn up your microphone.
For some reason, we don't hear you. So you might have to just write it in the chat. Okay. Can you write your response in the chat? All right. Maybe we can solve that later. So now I want to go to another text, one of my favorite texts about from the Bible of an encounter with God, and that is Moses at the burning bush from the book of Exodus. So when I show this on the screen, there's going to be 2 different texts or 2 different slides, same story. And I'd like to have 2 readers who could read this. How about Larry read the first one? And who would like to read the second one? Got a reader for the second? Anybody?
I'll do it.
Okay, George. Okay, so let's show you again with the slides. Here we go. All right, can you see this, Larry? Because I can always tell people are seeing. The burning bush, an encounter with the
Burning
divine.
bush. Now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. An angel of God appeared to him in a blazing fire out of the bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? Then God saw that he had turned aside to look. God called out to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses answered, Here I am. And he said, Do not come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. I am, he said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he's afraid to look at God. And God continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt.
Okay. Thank you. So, as I said, being from Texas, this is the most famous brush fire in history. Moses is out doing his everyday thing, being a shepherd, and he sees this. He has to really stop and notice what's happening, right? That probably took a while. And he hears this angel calling, which again has been explained as a sort of a messenger from God, a voice of God. It's God speaking to him, and he's told to take off his shoes. I think that's a beautiful detail, like being in touch with the earth. because of the sanctity of that moment, and that this God who speaks to him cares. God is going to take action to help the oppressed. Now, the second part after, and then Moses is like, who, me? What? No, what? And then God reassures him, and we continue. George.
Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh.
Or I'll say Ehyeh. I hope you don't mind me. I don't usually correct people. It's like Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh.
Thank you. I will be what I will be. He continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites,
Ehyeh.
Ehyeh sent me to you.
Okay.
And God said further to Moses, thus shall you speak to the Israelites. God,
So this is going to be the Yud. This is the name. Well, in the next slide, I'll talk about that name, the Yud He Vav He. Okay.
I see, yes. The God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever, and this my appellation for all eternity.
Okay, so at the bush, Moses is like, okay, God, I'm ready to go, but who am I going to say sent me? And God gives us two mysterious names, really, because first God says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I will be what I will be. Some have translated it as I am what I am, but maybe preferred translation, it's in the future tense, I will be what I will be. And as Rabbi David Wolpe points out, Moses doesn't apparently tell that name to anyone else. He keeps it to himself. And then God's like, tell them it's Yud He Vav He, which a couple of chapters later, 3 chapters later, God says, this is a new name. Well, it wasn't so new. It was back there in Genesis, but it's a name that is being revealed. The strength of this name is being revealed in the book of Exodus, the Yud He Vav He. Here we go. Oh, well, there it is. The Yud He Vav He. Well, here's the Shema. It's in the Shema, like Shema Yisrael, Adonai is Eloheinu, Adonai is Echad. Yud He Vav He is Eloheinu. Yud He Vav He is one. Yud He Vav He is our God. Yud He Vav He, if you learned in Hebrew school, don't read it as Yud He Vav He. You read it as what? Somebody unmute and tell me, how do you read that name?
Adonai.
Adonai, right? Adonai. Or Hashem, if you're just saying the name. It's so holy we can't even say it. But back in the earlier times, even into the first temple times, people did say it. How did they say it? Not totally sure, but it might have, scholars think it was Yahweh or Yahweh. I'm not trying to not pronounce it because we're not supposed to pronounce it. And we could say Yah, the first part, like hallelujah. The Jehovah was just like a big mix up with Christian scribes. I don't want to get into it right now. There was a mispronunciation of it. And we say Adonai, but we're mispronouncing. We're purposely not pronouncing this holy name. This name is so holy. You can see it in the middle of the picture here, the Yud He Vav He, that we put it on, this is called a shiviti. This is like a meditative piece of art that would be in the synagogue so that you could gaze on God's name, as it says in the Psalms. I will keep God's name before me. Literally, you could think about the letters of that name. If you came to our recent class on the 4 worlds of prayer, you could see it arrayed vertically too. So I know there may be questions about that name of God, but that's very important. And my teacher, Professor Leibowitz, said, we're actually working on a project right now in my spare time. I have no time to work on it, but it is why is this name so important to Jews? Why are we so obsessed with God's name more than any other religion? He said that it's not really attested in other religions that people are obsessed with God's name. And he thinks it's because we didn't have statues of God. We didn't have images of God. And so instead, we become preoccupied with the holiness of God's name. But what is so holy about that name? If you have the Yud He, all those letters of the Yud He Vav He are vowels. Like they're consonants that are also vowels, like a like the H in English is like a vowel too. It's even though it's a consonant. And the Vav was a wa, it was a soft sound. right? So Yud Hey Vav Hey, Rabbi Arthur Waskow says that it's like the sound of our breath. Listen to the sound of breath. And then, and then, and then. It is the sound of our breath. Even though it's a word where it's so holy you can't pronounce it, it's as close as your breath. You can hear it in your very breath. It's the sound of a baby's cry. It is just a universal sound. Now, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. Please go in a moment. And what I'd like you to think about, to talk about in your group is, what is this meaning? What's the meaning of this idea that God says, I will be what I will be? What did he mean by that? So you might want to jot that down for yourself as a question. What is this name God is giving? I will be what I will be. Was it a name of reassurance, like I'll always be with you? I'll always be the same. I'm not changing. I'm the eternal. Or is it a name of, you have no idea what I'll be. I'm constantly changing. I'm a mystery. You never know. I'm full of surprises. And what's the idea of giving a name that is so unpronounceable? Well, we made it so holy. The rabbis later on made it so holy you couldn't even say it, but it sounds like your breath, and yet it's so holy. You're not even supposed to say it. So what do you think of this name of God and this encounter with God at the burning bush? I'm going to break into breakout rooms and give you, just because we're running a little late, let's say about 7 minutes to talk about it. Is that okay? Send you to the rooms. How many people do we have? I think we have like, all right, we have 35 right now. So let's do, I'll do 7 breakout. Yeah, 7 breakout rooms sound good? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Go to your breakout room for about 7 minutes. Okay, go ahead. Hi, welcome back. Hello, welcome back from your break. Okay.
Interesting discussion. Happy to actually tell you what was said.
Yeah, I'd be very interested. So, well, let's see, how many groups did I have?
7.
7. Right? Oh boy, that would take a long time for all 7 to give a full report. How about, I think it just, if you're moved to, maybe we could have a few, we could take a few reports of just, not a report, but just something interesting that came to you that you want to share. Let's see if a few people, if there's anything you do want to share, or you could put it in the chat too, so people can read it.
I vote for George to be our spokesman. But you're muted.
Gabrielle, I was going to say you should describe what you did about the Mercury and about how you felt at 7 o'clock and how you feel at 8:15. That's an amazing story.
What is?
I tossed it back anyway.
Okay, so very quickly, so what our group discussed was the idea of a move. I will what I will be. I will be what I will be. A movable God was I would defer back to George, but he's got me talking. And I could imagine what was in a thermometer when we were children, if it was called quicksilver, just something moving and you couldn't capture it. And when I started at 7, it wasn't that way. But now that we've been discussing, all of a sudden, that's what God's like this.
Nice.
Right.
So you're already starting to get some movement in your ideas of God.
Right. It's evolving.
Great. That's exciting. Do we have anybody else want to share something, some revelation? If you had any, let's see. So esoteric, we had a wonderful discussion, yay, around understanding acceptance of God's words. Well, hopefully we'll put more and more of that in. You know, this is the first time I've taught such a big class. I thank you for all your patience with me. A big class online like that. But it's really, so any other sharing from that you had from your discussion? Something you got really inspired you want to share with everybody? Okay, Pat?
God is a discovery from our early childhood to the persons that we are now. And that's on a personal level and our own interaction and experiences with God. But in a more global, universal way, our interaction with God is I am who I am, it's like somebody said, it's all changing. When we look at the universe, the physics of it, how it's expanding and changing all the time, and just the timing of how things are and travel. And then you look at the DNA in terms of science and what science is doing with STEM research and everything. I mean, and in so many fields. So God working through minds to create is ever present and ever changing.
Thank you. Well, I think that's getting another vote for that Sinai and synapses. I mean, we should look into doing something with them, because science can really enhance our idea of God, or it could take away from it, right? So it's very interesting. Thank you. And anybody else have something you want to share from your breakout?
Rabbi.
Go ahead.
Three things. One, the burning bush, why wasn't it consumed? One idea was that it wasn't consumed because it shows that God is forever. In other words, there's an eternal, the eternal aspect of it. The other one is that the question was asked in our group, why doesn't God talk to us anymore? And then the one view was that maybe there's a substitution between the oral, the sort of anthropomorphic idea that God talks to us, and experience, that we experience God not necessarily through talk, but through other through experience, through other means. And then the other idea, and I'll go very quickly, is that I will be what I will be shows that God is evolutionary, that there's an evolutionary, that God will be what he will always be what he will be. So there's a certain evolutionary, God is evolving and always evolving.
Thank you. So eternal and yet evolving and not the same. Right. And I saw in the chat someone put about God being a verb, and there is a book, God is a Verb. I didn't put that on my list of books. But that's and it's not so far out. If you think that the name of God, Yud He Vav He, it's kind of like the verb to be, yeah. I mean, it's almost the same as that. It is kind of a verb, right? And that yeah, that's a verb. So saying God is a verb is not so far out. So just in the interest of time, I want to show you one other thing, but I like to point out that the rabbis don't agree about this question of what is this meaning of this, I will be what I will be. Rabbi David Wolpe, a very famous California modern day rabbi, said that actually God was assuring Moses that in fact he was going to be there for him and always be the same and always be constant for him and making him feel secure. But Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, a lot of us love to read a blessed memory, who was the chief rabbi in Great Britain at one time, he said that on the contrary, it is a name of radical change and transformation. I will be what I will be means I will enter history and transform it. And there's no way that anyone can know what I'm going to do. I'm the force of change and activism. So two very different views of this, I will be what I will be. So finally, I want to show you one other, well, couple other ideas, because while I was studying for this class myself, I started reading a new book that came out from a woman rabbi, and it's called God is Here. I'm so excited. Rabbi Toba Spitzer, Reconstructionist rabbi. So excited that I want to bring her in. In this book, so let me show you. I'm going to show you again on the slide. So we know that the 10 Commandments says, right? 10 Commandments says, don't make any graven image or likeness of God. You didn't see anything. I don't have a form. I know sometimes people, sometimes, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, but we can't get into that right now. But basically,
You're freezing up.
okay, can you hear me now? Am I good now?
Yes.
And I've got.
Uh-oh.
You have now
That's-
frozen.
This is the modern day version of a burning bush. Unexplainable.
I think we have lost the rabbi.
Yeah, how ironic.
No, I'm still here. I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know. I've got myself plugged in and everything. Bottom line is, there's no set form for God, but there's an ever-changing kaleidoscope of metaphors, and they don't have to all be personal. In fact, it seemed like a lot of people were less comfortable as modern people with the idea of God the person, and yet in our prayer book, it's all full of God the person in a way, right? We often talk about God in ways of personhood, whether it's a king, even if it's the Lord is my shepherd, which is beautiful, God's a guide, but according to Toba Spitzer, the Bible is full of nature metaphors for God. Of course, I got into that because I have a website which is all about Jewish images in nature, wellsprings of wisdom. Let me try this again. I hope it works. Okay. So we can see beautiful metaphors of God that are outside the king and father and patriarchy. God as the shepherd, God as water. And she points out a lot of these. For example, God is called a luxuriant stream, the fountain of life, of life. We could also feel overwhelmed by the flood of life. We could feel ourselves clinging to God, or we could feel refreshed with God's abundance, as a metaphor of water. There's even a metaphor of God as an eagle, taking us on God's wings, spreading God's wings and taking us out from Egypt, soaring. There's metaphors of God as a rock. David speaks to God and says, God, Yud He Vav He, you're my rock, you're my secure place. God is also depicted in other ways, like as a cloud of mystery, right? And finally, God is a voice. When the prophets call, God is a voice calling us to righteousness. And God's, this is from the Haftarah of Yom Kippur, that God wants us to unlock the fetters of wickedness, untie the cords of the yoke, let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke, to share our bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into our house and clothe the naked, and etc. So we have so many other metaphors for God to freshen our ideas of God. We don't have to be stuck in the idea of God as king, God as father. That could be helpful sometimes, but not only those, right? And I wondered, and if you want to put in the chat, do you have a metaphor for God, or do you want to try a new metaphor? And I'd encourage people to read that book, God is Here. Just the beautiful ideas that she has about God as nature images. What about us being in God's image? Well, the way I think about it, Jeffrey, do you want to know what I think it means? Like me? I think it's because of consciousness, that there's a consciousness that, this is me, but this is getting way away from things in the Bible, that God is like the consciousness that fills all creation, and we're like snippets off that big hologram. We're a bit of that consciousness. Our consciousness is part of that divine consciousness. That's what I think. But I showed you on Saturday that it could mean like your body looks like God's name. Or that, you're trying to be, you want to do godly deeds to the 13 attributes of God, all the kindness and patience and forbearance and mercy and so on, that would make you in God, show that you're in God's image. There's also a wonderful book I have of God's image in the more than human world by Rabbi David Seidenberg. I didn't even put that in my list, but that's more an ecological idea that not only human beings, but all creation is in the divine image. Okay, we got some other ideas. God is an alter ego. First cause and breath. Wow, I've got some really great ideas of God. Okay. Or even you can get, don't worry if like you don't have some super sophisticated idea. It could be an artistic image. We have some artists among us, some gardeners among us, some creative people among us, right? God the artist, God the light, the God the heart, God, could be something in nature. God the depths when you're by the ocean. So I hope as we go along, you'll be thinking maybe of some of your own ideas of what your metaphors, and it's the whole idea of not having a graven image is they don't stay the same all the time. They change. Maybe one day, God, you just need God to be like a parent. And another day it's like, oh, God could be, we'll see in Kabbalah, like the boundless light and so forth. So my last slide here, last two slides here. By the way, this was also a little bit of plug for Trua, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, because my daughter works for them. So the book that in our textbook, if you read chapter 1, you'll see they said there are 9 basic biblical ideas of God. How about, I'm Marilyn, could you just read those for us? Would you be okay reading that?
Sure. Monotheism, there is only one God. 2, God has a name. 3, no one knows what God looks like. 4, God acts in the world. 5, God has a special relationship with Israel. 6, Israel has a covenant with God. 7, God requires ethical behavior. 8, God is a personal God. 9, we cannot understand why the righteous suffer.
Okay, that's a tough one, right? And hopefully we'll get to that next week with Rabbinic. We'll look in the Bible, what the Bible says about why people suffer if God is so good and everything's so great, right? And God is good and loving. Why are people suffering? So we'll see the Bible had several answers. And then what did the rabbis say about that? And that special covenant with God is the Brit. Brit is not just a circumcision. Brit is any kind of covenant with God. Those covenants were kind of modeled on the ideas of ancient people and their treaties and alliances with different kings or emperors, the things that they owed them. So we have a covenant with God that we're going to keep God's commandments. But guess what? There's also a covenant with all of humanity. And going to Tu B'Shvat, maybe this is a beautiful one for us to read today. Let's see if I can get somebody. I can't see everybody who's here right now. So let me see. Who might want to read right now? Could I have, let's see. Ellen Rabinowitz, can you read this? Okay.
Yeah.
Last text we're going to look at.
Okay.
Because we only have 5 minutes.
The first covenant, Brit, Genesis 9. And God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and your offspring to come, and with every living thing that is with you, birds, cattle, and every wild beast as well, all that have come out of the ark, every living thing on earth. I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth.
Mm-hmm.
God further said, this is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you and every living creature with you for all ages to come.
And it's the rainbow, which I took a picture of there. Okay. Outside my house. Thank you. All right. So I just added that because I hope we remember when we think that we have a covenant with God, a brit, the Jews do, that all of creation has it, right? All animals and plants do too. And how would it be different if we saw that that's in the Torah too? So I hope you've come away today seeing that the idea of a biblical God is not so simple. If that alone, that's good, right? That it's not just that Old Testament God who's zapping people and getting angry. Yes, God is impassioned. God is emotional often in the Bible, especially in early parts of the Bible. But there's so much more, right? There's mystery, there's encounter, there are all kinds of multifaceted metaphors. There are different names for God. As we'll see in a couple of classes, there was a lot of worshiping of goddesses going on too. And encounter, I'll come back to those words again, encounter, metaphor. These are things that we can look for too. Where do we encounter God? Where do we have those little burning bush experiences, our own little moments of awe? And what metaphors do we have? Can we make them more sophisticated, more playful, more open, more accessible? In fact, that's the reason we can't have an image, is because we have so many images. Next week, we're going to be meeting on Wednesday, just next week, because Thursday is Your Neighbor's Faith, an ongoing program, an interfaith program. Wednesday will be kind of my special interest because I did my dissertation about the Holy Spirit in rabbinic writings, and see how God talks to us through the Holy Spirit. Did you know that was Jewish? And it's a her. Okay. And a lot of rabbinic stories about God who becomes very personal and very close to us in totally new and different metaphors. So I'm looking forward to having you here, and feel free, if you had other questions that didn't get answered, feel free to stay for a few minutes, but we're going to be wrapping up our class and turning off the recording now. So thank you very much for being here tonight. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.